Hello everyone, I continue my BMW Fest this month with this, the much loved M140i, a car until today I had never driven. Now my previous experience with the baby M lights was in my stepmother's old M135i convertible. Now that was the N55 engined car with the DCT gearbox. Now, I'm not going to spend really too much, if any, time going over what makes the 140 different. In short, completely new engine and ZF 8-speed box. If you want to know more about it, loads of other people, including myself, have talked about it in a lot of other videos. But I got this car off the back of my video about my dad's 440i, which has the same engine and transmission combo, but is, of course, a much larger, bigger car that exists in a totally different category. And the truth is that the 440 really is somewhat overlooked. Because of this, people go absolutely bananas for the little M140. And I use that word little somewhat sparingly because it's little if you compare it to a 440, but from where I'm sitting, this does not feel like a little car at all. This feels like a very, very large car. That's both a good and a bad thing. On the good side, this rides like a very competent, very mature car. Now, to tell you a little bit more about this example that channel fan Trystan has brought us today, it is visually a little bit modified, but otherwise completely stock. There is no tune, there is no suspension modifications, no exhaust modifications, nothing. This is a Shadow Edition, which, I'll be honest, I don't know too much about, but it's basically a bunch of options thrown at the car as they're kind of nearing the end of their life to make them a little bit more attractive in the showrooms and just help get them out the door. So it's just a few mods and things here and there to, you know, get people interested in them. And I gotta say, I know the 1 Series has been dividing looks since it came out, but it's really grown on me. And some of the recent cars, the M140s in particular, with a little bit of add-ons here and there, they look awesome. In fact, I know that Motec recently worked on one of these in the awesome sort of bright, bold red color that BM do, and that was a properly nice looking car. So, you know, the 140 and the 1 Series in general has really grown into its looks. Of course, there is no such thing as a 1 Series convertible or coupe anymore. That's been taken over by the 2 Series. And if you want to know my opinion of a 2 Series, watch this space. Now, an awful lot of what I could say about this car, I could say about pretty much any car in the BMW lineup using the 4.0i setup. Very good engine with an awful lot of torque, quite low down, that in certain circumstances does present me with a bit of an issue. Now, this car, of course, has no mechanical limited slip differential because it is totally standard, so I'm going to see in a little bit how that may affect making progress. And as much as on paper I would like to say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if they had kept a dual clutch in this, BMW are one of the few manufacturers that I can name, along probably with Alfa Romeo, that have just absolutely nailed this 8-speed ZF. Now, mechanically, of course, it will be the same as what a lot of other people use, but software is very important when it comes to modern gearboxes, and BMW software is some of the best in the business. Honestly, I think if you put a double clutch in this, you probably would be doing the car harm, because it then wouldn't be anywhere near as well mannered when you're driving around in town. However, what this thing is well known for is carving through a country road. And what I have about to appear in front of me is one of my favorite slices of country road. Response in this is just so good. I just love these big BM motors. They are by far the least turbo feeling in terms of response of all of their contemporaries. Now, I was talking with this car's owner a few minutes ago about what would you really compare this with, because could you put it in the same bracket as, say, an A45 or an RS3? You know, on paper, they're still quite far apart, you know, in terms of price and in terms of numbers. But honestly, I probably would. does like to light up the rears. It really does. Brake pedal's actually not too sensitive, which is quite nice, because I've been driving around my 911 and that's got a pedal that you really need to lean on, so often when I get in something else I tend to wind up breaking my neck the first time I go to brake seriously. Oh yeah, you can feel the back end. It is lively, and having driven one of these cars with a limited slip diff on, that makes all the difference. If I had one of these, I think I would be looking to put on a limited slip diff much sooner than I would be looking at upgrading the power. Of course, the thing is that upgrading the power in these is very, very easy, and there's lots of different options for getting quite a lot out of them. And because it is still a big 3-litre 6-cylinder, well, you'd be very confident, I think, about the engine being able to handle a kind of 400 to 500 horsepower figure. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that those engines are good for that all day long. When you look at something like the A45 being a 2-litre 4-cylinder, and you look at the power output that has as standard, I kind of think, is that going to last? I don't know. And, you know, when you're looking at cars that are in warranty and you're dabbling with things that could maybe, you know, screw that warranty up, well, you got to be very careful. She stops when she needs to. The car's on Pilot Super Sports, which is probably one of the reasons that it rides a little bit better, I think, than the 440 does on the stock run flats. And while I'm just driving through town going gently, this seems as good a time as any to mention the fact that this is one of the many 140s to pass through the doors of Bury BMW down at Heathrow. I don't know quite what those guys have done, but they're certainly doing it right. Now, on paper, one of these cars might look to be almost as expensive as something like an M2, but I do know that some of the finance deals that are available on them are rather tempting, shall we say. So if you're in the position of looking at one of these and wondering whether it's affordable or not, I know for a fact that if you speak to Dave at Bimmer Deals or Tony at TRL, they both work for Bury BMW Heathrow, and well, they've put enough people in these cars that I'm fairly sure if you speak to them and ask them really nicely, they'd probably be able to sort something out. I'm not a finance person, don't take that as official finance advice or anything, but, you know, I've spoken to these guys enough that they're passionate, and honestly, when it comes to car salesmen, that's something that's very, very rare these days. Anyway, back to the action. Now, moving through this little section of road, which was still in a 30, so we're only doing 30, this car does feel very, very wide. The one thing that is really helping me, apart from the fact that I have a camera stuck on the end of the bonnet, so I know where that is the fact that I can actually see a lot of this bonnet. Of course, the 1 Series, like all cars, the bonnets had to get higher to meet all of the new safety regs and things, and I see a lot of people moaning about all modern cars looking sort of the same. Well, unfortunately, that's not designers being lazy, that's just them having to design a car that meets regulations, and regulations stipulate an awful lot. Why do you think all the cars on the F1 grid look exactly the same? It's not because they all want them to look the same, it's because, well, they got a very, very big rule book, and what a tit in a Volvo. This thing responds so well, and it pulls quick. Now, this exhaust is completely standard, as with the rest of the mechanicals of this car, and it's got an enjoyable tone, and it's got this kind of gruff sound to it. It doesn't sound artificial at all. I'd probably want something a little bit more. Now, having already sampled the standard Remus catback and the M Performance exhaust, I do really like the M Performance item, but Remus also have a racier catback exhaust, which I'd be very interested to hear, because I think that would be kind of nice. The engine certainly produces a lovely tone on its own, and let's face it, when it comes to these things, getting a car that sounds nice to begin with is very, very good, because if you're trying to make something that doesn't sound nice, well, it's not a very easy thing to do. You can really feel it scrabbling under you. Now, this is the kind of day and the kind of road where something like an A45 or an RS3 would really show its dominance, because with the all-wheel drive systems that those have, like, you can write and preach about, oh, Audi's understeer and all that shit, and as much as you want. The truth is, that latest RS3, by the time that thing starts understeering, you were going so stupendously quick, you probably would have done the same thing in this. You were going to have a bad old time one way or another. However, with this thing, if you're sensible, and, you know, I'm not the sort of person that wants to time my runs between places, because that only ever ends one way, with your car being extracted from a particular hedge or ditch. But this thing certainly shifts lovely, and having that throttle respond very precisely to what you tell it to do is really important. Now, steering feel, there's a little, but there's not a lot. However, the chassis is very communicative, and what's really brilliant about this car is the seats. Now, I don't really know the 1 Series very well, and I don't think there's any options with the seats, but these things are hugging me really nicely. They actually do remind me of the seats in the old E46 M3. Those had adjustable bolsters, so you could set them to grab you, and I always had mine set quite firmly, so they really held you well, and these do remind me of that. And as that's one of the things I like the most about my E46 M3, that's a good thing. The other things that would maybe concern me about this car are the fact that BMW, in their finite wisdom, have chosen to fit very narrow rear tyres to this car. So this is wearing only 245 section rears. It's got 225 fronts. They're 18s, which is a great size, and again, another reason it probably rides surprisingly well. But that's also a reason that back end is a touch lively. A car with this amount of power and this amount of torque, I'd want to get 2 6.5s on the back at least. And I think with something like that, you can still have all the fun you want. This car is still going to have the power and the torque to overwhelm a 265, especially in conditions like today. But it's also going to give you that little bit more grip when you're kind of pressing on and when you really need that rear to hook up. So that's a slightly strange decision by BMW, and I can't see any real reason other than them just saying, well, it's the 1 Series, so let's give it smaller tyres. Now, this car's owner has said to me that one of the issues with it is a level of tyre roar. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to agree at the moment, simply because I haven't spent any real time in the car, and I'm used to an old school 911, which is basically the king of tyre roar. It's pretty bad. However, in here, this car does feel very upmarket, and it's a good thing too, because I know they are not cheap cars, no matter how you look at it. And maybe this is one reason I'm not quite so in love with the 4 Series in some ways, is because this interior does feel strikingly similar to the 4, ignoring the fact that, you know, the 4 has some nicer materials and things, and so I really would have expected a bigger difference. The dash is laid out in a slightly different way, but honestly nothing really to write home about. But other than that, you know, this still feels like a Beamer, basically. The last hatch that I drove with any sort of verve was a Fiesta ST, and this is about as far away from a Fiesta ST as you can possibly imagine. I'd say the Fiesta actually has this beat for driver involvement. The Fiesta also struggles in these conditions, I would say, far more than this does, because you've got that front wheel drive, narrow tyres, and no limited slip diff there either, and so the Fiesta would be constantly struggling. But it kind of part of the fun of a car like that, a car of this performance ability, when it starts doing those kind of things, does concern me a little bit more. Otherwise though, the M140 isn't really much of a surprise to me, which is fine, because what I expected it to be was very competent at crossing these kind of roads at a great pace. Two biggest surprises: actually how well it rides, even in sport mode, very compliant, actually really shockingly so, and the seats, love them. Otherwise, it's business as usual from BMW, meaning that the engine and transmission are basically the best in business. If I had one of these, what will be first on my to-do list? Well, I might retrim the steering wheel to make it a little thinner. That's personal preference. I definitely give it a fruitier exhaust, and I would also put a limited slip differential on it. After that, I'd probably wrap it red and do some other things to it. But for a starting point, I can see why people love these. I really can. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed my little review of the M140i. Late to the party as always, but I'm glad I came. I'll see you all for the next one. Please hit the like button, comment if you haven't already, subscribe, does make a difference. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.